Rocks are something that can add a lot to a model railroad. Today we're making this scene on a hex track module, and we're using zero plaster, Sculptamold, or anything like that. Just some extruded foam and a hobby knife and a file. Let's get to it. This video is brought to you with support from trains.com. Right now you can use the promo code JimmyDIY to save $10 on an order of $50 or more. You can check them out at the link in the description. This is a hex track module designed by YouTuber Tabletop Railroad. It is an amazingly simple, compact module that has a lot of versatility with it. If you want the flexibility of T-Track but don't even have the space for that, hex track is the way to go. I'll link them in the description below. The first thing we need to do is glue the feet that come with it onto the bottom, and then glue a piece of Kato 248mm track aligned with the marks on top. Once that is done, I can start attaching my foam that is going to make up the terrain of the module. Now for this, I'm using 1 inch thick extruded foam insulation. I found this at my local hardware store that sells these 2x2 sheets, that's 2 feet by 2 feet, which I find perfect for projects. And I found these both at Lowe's and Home Depot, so whichever you prefer to, you can go to. At Home Depot, sometimes they're in a bin sitting on the side near the insulation. At Lowe's, I found them with the rest of the extruded foam sheets. I start by taking rough cut sections and using the module as a stencil to cut everything out into shape. Once I have the rough shape layers, I can glue them on, and I'm just using some super glue for this. You can use something like Loctite Power Grab or latex caulk as well. This is just what worked for me. Now I need to shape the foam into the design that I want. To do this, I'm first going to draw the cut lines and elevation changes with a Sharpie. This will help me visualize the markings more clearly as I cut. Once this is done, I can trim out the areas I need to cut away using a hobby knife. After I am done cutting, I use a file to clean up my edges and give the foam a more organic shape. Now, one thing that is important when working with foam like this is to clean up after you have done carving everything like this. Foam bits can get into your scenery and mess up painting and gluing, and they can also be a pain to remove from your scenery later. I use a mix of brushing away and canned air to clean this module, and then I just go dump everything in the trash. Once that is done, it is time to paint, and I'm just using some cheap brown acrylic paint, and I will be painting the entire module, track included. I take the edges of the track though, since they're going to be crucial for my electrical connections. Now, once I am done painting, I wipe the paint off of the top of the rails before it has a chance to dry there. This will give my rails a good weathered look while still allowing for electrical conductivity. Then I let the module dry. Now it's time for ballasting the track, and I'm going to be using some Scenic Express dark gray fine ballast. I start along the edges with some glue, then spread my ballast. I then use a brush to neaten it up and even it out. Now I'm very careful not to get my glue on the tops of the rails or the ties. This will help me a lot later. I also sprinkle ballast in the middle and even it out by tapping the brush on top in kind of a stippling motion so that we can see the rails and the ties clearly. Now I can soak it with isopropyl alcohol, which releases the surface tension. That's 90% IPA, by the way. And then I'll use my glue water mixture, by the way, which is 35% white glue, 65% water, and then a few drops of dish soap. And those estimates are rough. You don't have to be exact with that, but I use that and soak everything and let it dry. I end up letting that dry overnight just to make sure it's good and dry. I don't want any of the foam that I'm about to work on to get into that and then glue into the track bed. So now it's time to make those rock faces, and what I'm going to do is basically chip away at the random areas that I want the rock faces to be. Now the key here is to not make it look like the rock face is cut into in kind of a concave, but rather exposed. So I can't make the cuts too deep, and I'm going to use a couple of different tools here to make this happen. I've got a hobby knife, a hobby carving blade, and I'll link those below. I do also use a file to smooth them out a bit, but not too much. And then I clean up the area entirely just like before and paint it. I start with a dark gray as the base for the rocks. I'm then going to use a technique called dry brushing. Dry brushing is basically where you put a bit of paint on your brush and then you wipe off about 90% of it and you paint back and forth. The effect is that typically the paint only shows up on the edges and details rather than the entire area. Now this does take some practice, but is a skill that I can highly recommend you learn. It's pretty easy and it will definitely elevate your modeling exponentially. I do multiple passes with different paint and also using progressively less paint. I start with a medium gray, then I use white to pop the highlights of the details, and then a light brown to add a little bit of weathering and earth, and then a little black to highlight some of the shadows in there. And this gives me a rock face that really pops. Now, this is only part of making these rock faces look good. The second part is blending them into the scenery so they look natural. I start with using my usual Scenic base, an earth blend of blended turf, and I'm very careful not to get glue on the rock faces though before sprinkling on the turf. I don't want to accidentally get some of that turf on there. I then soak it with IPA and my glue mixture to get it all put in place. Now while that is drying, I come back with some coarse turf to cover some of the sloped areas and hard edges. It's great for making it look more natural. Coarse turf is also great for modeling unkept undergrowth. Once it is placed, I soak it with more IPA and glue it. Now once again, I let all of that dry overnight, and it's time for the one scenery item that can really make a scene like this pop. And it's one thing that if you learn how to do it, it can really make your scenery in general pop. And that is static grass. Static grass uses static electricity to make small fibers stand up in a glue that you put down. It can be any glue, by the way. So I start by pouring my glue mixture and then applying the static grass using a static grass applicator. You have to touch one end, which has a little wire coming out usually, to the glue, and then you shake it over there, and that's going to allow the static electricity to do enough to get the current flowing through it. You really have to play with it to get your technique right, and it's important to let the rest of the scenery dry before applying it because the static grass can go everywhere and you're going to need to remove the excess. Also, this thing can shock you pretty good if you get too close, so be careful. I've totally shocked myself before. Now, once everything is dry, I can get rid of the excess static grass with some carefully placed canned air and brushing. Not too much though, you want to barely do it. Canned air is also good in very light amounts for teasing static grass upwards, but again, not too much. It'll mess it up if you do it too much, so just a little tiny amount. Once cleanup is done, I add some more coarse turf in a few little areas just to shore up some places in terms of scenery, including the edges of the rock faces just to help them blend a little more. Now that is done, I can place some trees. Now these are some conifers from JTT Scenery. I cut the bases off, then use a bamboo skewer to make a hole, and finally I put a bit of white glue on the bases of them and place them into that hole. I then grab some clump foliage to add some bushes where it looks appropriate, but I don't add too many. And here is the finished result. Modules like this are great if you want to practice your scenery or have a layout that is easy to break down that still looks really good. I have linked all of the products in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, and happy railroading.